It began in a basement. Moss in Ashland recently on the New York Times restaurant list. 50 places in America they're excited about this year. Only 2 Oregon restaurants made that list. Chef Josh Dorcak says while Moss may look a little different than when it started, the philosophy behind the food and the cooking remain the same.
It had like a retro gas fireplace and then these picnic tables, like nice picnic tables that Jamie had bought, and I would just move them together. And so it was just like a long picnic bench communal dining situation. Yeah, and people would just sit together and chat and talk, and like it was just surreal that people found it and did it for a full year. And so Saturday I would go up through the apple gates, through all like the farms, like stopping and picking produce, you know, from the farms going up to the Grants Pass Saturday market, where then I would kind of get the other filler, and then kind of like driving back through down, I think it's 238 or whatever, through the apple gate, and like having the time in the car, like with all this stuff that like I've just, you know, personally picked, to think about like what am I gonna do with it. So I held those drives like pretty sacredly, you know. It was just quiet time, listen to music, and then get back to mix, you know, usually after the bakers were done, like 3 o'clock, and then just like shove the refrigerators full of produce and then start processing. Wasabi is from the Oregon coast, from Yahat's Oregon Wasabi Farm. Very cleverly named. And these are just beautiful that came in today. I mean, I don't think I've ever had them like they're this big from them.
I stopped by Moss on a Wednesday, prep day, a busy day for Chef Josh Dorcak and his team.
But then like once we kind of trim it off, and it's like the texture and flavor is like light years better. Yeah, unassuming.
Moss can be found in downtown Ashland, tucked away in an alley, slightly hidden, and just like that fish, unassuming. His first real chef job was at a place called Pearl in Oakland. He moved to Ashland, got a job at Amuse, moved away, and came back to be the head chef there. For him, food has always been important.
I think it was just always like the good time, you know, like everyone like coming together at a dinner table, having like a role to play, and like producing something as like a family was, you know, and everyone was like getting along, and like so I think food was like a, you know, like that safe place, you know, especially with like a group of people just being community. I think I just fell in love with it from that regard. But then like the pleasure of just like hosting and like serving people, it's just, I don't know, it's like my favorite part about the whole thing. Culinary school happened because it was the only thing that I could really get into. You know, it was not like academic. So when it came to like, you know, eking out a graduation in high school, and then either I was gonna go to like film school and like pursue editing. And then my friend was like, I'm going to culinary school. And I was like, oh, I had no idea there was even such a thing. And then I applied, and of course, you know, they'll accept anyone. And so I started going to culinary school, and that's it. Everything for me as far as like that academic kind of realm clicked, you know. I excelled at that type of school. And then, you know, that's where I like found the industry. Like in that moment when I was just like 18 years old, I don't think I like understood the gravity of what I was getting into. But like as the years kind of like click by and you're doing the same thing, it's just like, of course, you know, this is just keeps, the road keeps like being extended. You know, I haven't reached the end of it as far as like knowledge base, interest level in what I do. So it's definitely like, it's inspiring.
When you have that mindset, is it harder to burn out, you think?
Yeah. For me personally.
Have you burned out yet?
No, I don't. I think it's so deeply ingrained into me. I think burning out would be like death or something, you know? It's just like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
What does make sense is this, here, It's where he feels most at home.
Getting outside of the cloak of like hiding in a kitchen, you know, like I am not a social person by any means, so I like cooking because it gives me something to do. Like it gives me a purpose as far as like I don't have to do small talk. But like with Moss, you know, like we're center stage, right? We are having to do the small talk, but it's about an acute detail of something that's very like almost intimate to me. So it's become a lot more easy to just like be honest and come across as just like a real human to our guests. You know, we are not trying to like do fine service points. Like we swear, we tell it how it is, you know, because we're actually real and we're the ones cooking.
But that mantra didn't always exist. Getting to this place took time, some soul searching, but Josh says the idea has always been there.
I would think of restaurants and like just write down the concepts on like yellow legal pad, you know, from like name, general concept, and all the way through like financial performance, you know, just as like, you know, that's what I would just do when I was working at Amuse because I wanted to open my own place. And Moss was like the one that was like my dream restaurant, like the tasting menu only, the destination dining thing, and yeah, something that I still have that legal pad of like the original concept of Moss, and I think that is like for me to look like to actually look at that piece of paper and be like, holy fuck, like that is actually this, but beyond what that original idea could have ever been. Like in my late 20s, living in Southern Oregon was definitely like the ceiling was getting shorter and shorter, and I was having more like of like this burnout, kind of like mental health, not crisis, but like definitely like experiencing more depression than I've ever felt, because it's like, how do you progress a culinary career, you know, in a small community, you know, to a high level?
Like feeling suffocated?
Yeah, like I should go to a big city, right? Because that's the obvious choice. And I think, you know, after starting Moss, I mean, like this has like saved so much of, I think my identity, you know, like I think like Southern Oregon had my time, and to think about like leaving it behind to go back home to the Bay Area or Seattle or Portland, it, you know, that would, I don't know, I would just like blend in.
Starting Moss in the basement of Mix was out of necessity. Josh wanted it to happen, but with no money of his own, it was his only choice. Turns out, it was a good one.
Starting a restaurant wherever you are, you know, is quite psychotic and ultimately not a good idea from a financial perspective. And so I think, you know, Jamie North you know, like offering the space, you know, being like, hey, you should do a pop-up here. And it's like, yeah, totally. I've been wanting to ask you that as well. So like from day zero, like, I don't know, like this road has just kind of been like unfolding itself. Like there hasn't been a major roadblock in like creating Moss. Fairy godmother type stuff. And I feel like there is definitely someone that's like totally guiding the path, you know, like, and I think that's a big part of maybe the success. It hasn't been like ultimately like forced. We've just been kind of going with the flow, which makes it, I mean, from a creative standpoint, like a whole lot easier to be creative when you're not just like suffocated by the other real outside real world. Kaniki is what they're called in Japanese. In American, they're known as idiot fish, because apparently they look like big doofuses.
Nice.
And I have two in the fridge that are aged for just about like 4 days, and the difference is incredible. You know, I don't think the food is anything new to the world as far as like the concept and what we do, like as a tasting menu, but the actual like whole experience of like, we're serving you, we're pouring you wine, and we're talking. Mas being a Spanish word for more, the umlauts are like aesthetically cool, they mean nothing. But more from our community, looking at food differently. More from me and the team, pushing the menu and evolving all the time. But really, like, the thing to start was like Mas is like there's so much more to food than what we know, especially in this region. And it's just kind of like unfolding the layers and trying to tell the story on a gastronomic level. It's been fun.
There's a unique opportunity. The Rogue Valley is like one of the permaculture capitals of the country. And so, outside of some proteins from Japan, everything is basically sourced here from the valley. And I think that it's important because how do you tell a story about this place if it's not made with the ingredients from this place? To be able to cook at a restaurant of this caliber in a place that isn't a city, it's like I'm not a city person, and I just got tired of like the city politics of food and the competition and the constantly like comparing yourself. And it's like at some point, it's like chefs aren't really cooking their food; they're cooking competitively with people around them, and it's like the romanticism is lost. And so it's like what Josh does here could only happen here.
Evan Bowling is Josh's brother-in-law and also his chef de cuisine. From Alaska, and after opening some restaurants in Austin, Texas, he found himself unsure of his next step. A serendipitous accident in the new year, getting stuck in Southern Oregon due to weather, he asked Josh if he needed any help in the kitchen. They've been side by side ever since.
The way Josh's brain works with food is like so different from like my experiences, like one thing that I've come to appreciate and understand about his philosophy is like, nothing's rigid, there's no rules. It's like when he wants you to make like, a particular sauce, it's like he doesn't actually want that. He wants like the inspiration for the sauce, right? Like it doesn't, like it could be like a traditionally cream-based sauce, but like maybe it doesn't have to have cream. It's just like there's just like it's like jazz, like that's what it is. And I've been used to cooking in this sort of like rigid orchestra, of kitchens. And I didn't even know this was possible.
And I'm just trying to convey to Evan like what I'm thinking, and then it enters Evan's hands and it turns into what Evan has made, And so I think it's just it's a wonderful like teamwork aspect, where it's like I'm not the type to be like this isn't exactly what I said, like I'm relying on him having feel and finesse and his own palate to create the food, like that's why he works here. Having abalone of that size, like that's really inspiring and cool. But like the diet of the abalone, it's just seaweed, and so it's like we have this like local seaweed, so we braised it within that, plus the dashi, which is kelp broth, and like the liver, it just tastes a lot like seaweed because that's what it's processing. So that combined with more seaweed, it just turns it into like this umami, funky paste that's completely like, it's delicious but uncomfortable, which I think is kind of important for dining here. Like there has to be some element of this dinner that's going to like be like, I don't know, like liver, what the fuck, from a fish, and it just like kind of pushes people into that like like just trust us, like it's going to be super delicious. But then you have like the element of like the pumpkin, like the velouté, that's like ultimately like a pumpkin soup. So it's like familiar, you're comforted. And then the texture of the braised abalone is kind of like octopus, which I think most people have more or less had, but still, it's a unique one. And so like, I don't know. I like when dining here is like, you're using your brain in all aspects as like a diner. Like you're thinking about your comfort zone, whether you like it, the texture, something you've had in the past, this is the new thing for you, and like, so it's like you're engaged instead of just like eating a plate of food.
Maybe that's why this restaurant, this experience, made the New York Times restaurant list. Josh calls the moment he found out a, quote, immobilizing goosebump thing. But it wasn't just about seeing the name of his restaurant on the list.
To see Ashland on the list of like cities, you know, it's just like, that's cool. I think that Brett wrote that like Ashland's on the culinary map is like, that's even more superior than just being on the list. That gives us as a community, as a region, like a way more of a fighting chance than we've ever had. So it's like, it just gave us an entry card into like the restaurant game, and we get to compete with the rest of the nation now.
I think I'm still reacting to it. Like, it's surreal, but I think at the end of the day, it's like, we just have to keep doing what we've been doing. And I think that was like the kind of sobering reminder, you know, it's like, oh my God, like, what does this mean now? And it's like, well, it doesn't actually mean anything different from us. You know, like, it's different on the other side. There's more people, there's more interest, but like, we don't have to change anything about what we do.
I mean, where we're at now, it's more like we're surviving on like, for this week. There's a few things that will like ferment and kind of get through from last week that'll be for later, like winter time. But like right now, we're so much busier than we've ever been.
Word spread about the announcement and foot traffic increased. Josh says they went from serving about 30 people a week to nearly 85. That's about 1,000 plates of food in a week.
I don't know, compete on this national level, there has to be some sort of like defined purpose of why you would come here as opposed to any other restaurant in the world. And I think Moss has that now. I think people feel at home, you know. A few people have told me like, you know, I'll like leave the bottle of wine on the table after pouring it, and not to like encourage them to pour it, but they're like, are we now, you know, like we just feel comfortable that we could. And it's like, yeah, totally. I mean, I'm gonna charge you.
The customers don't just feel at home here, Josh does too. It's the place where he turns on. A different side of him comes out.
I'm the exact opposite. Like, I don't want to go to the grocery store because I don't want to like see anyone, or like there is this kind of like element of like social anxiety for sure. But here it's like that doesn't exist, you know, because it's everything that I know, and I know a lot about it, and it's kind of like a controlled environment. It's like a perfect little storm.
It's your happy place.
It's the dojo for sure. We use every part of it. So like the kernels are like the easiest part, and then we'll cook the cobs with dashi and acorn miso, and that'll be like the broth for the soup course. And then we have, I think this week we got in these like tiger prawns from Japan that'll kind of like just be gently poached like while we're serving it. So basically raw prawns that are like warming through in the acorn miso corn broth.
Josh says there has to be a why, a purpose, intent behind every ingredient, and while he's not looking to expand Moss, he is looking to make it a better space. His current kitchen is all digital, which Josh calls convenient, clean, and accurate, but at the end of the day, he's missing the element of fire.
Whenever we do light up like a grill with charcoal or anything, and you're able to like finesse the food along, there's just like a much deeper connection you actually have with it, and that's the one thing that I have missed over the last 6 years, is just like the consistency of that relationship. Because with like, I don't know, modern cooking techniques, they're cool, but like ultimately it's convoluted and stupid. Like if we could just be cooking things as we would naturally cook them, you know, and then also producing the quality that we're able to do here, I think it would just mean more. There's always something new, especially for Moss. You know, it's like the evolution that the restaurant has gone through, and the amount that it's like been able to change. Really, like there is no ceiling, so there is no confinement.